Hello, everyone. I'm Jess Abrams. I'm the chair of Sound Sense. Welcome to another Training the Community Musician conversation. I'm here today with Dave Camlin. Welcome,
Hi.
Dave. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Tell us a wee bit about who you are and your practice and where it all
Okay, so
started.
I'm a musician. I kind of that's the main thing I identify by. I'm based up in West Cumbria, which is in the north of the UK. So it's a remote, rural part of the world that I live. I was brought up here, and I moved away, and I didn't train to be a musician. I kind of learned to be a singer-songwriter in folk clubs and playing with bands and all of that kind of thing. So from a very informal background, and then I moved back here when I was looking for somewhere to settle down, and I kind of got into community music inadvertently, really. I mean, to start off with, it was all I had trained as a teacher, and I was teaching. I've moved back up here, and I had a job in a secondary school, but I was a gigging musician as well, and kind of living one life through the week in a school and another life at the weekend, kind of traveling and gigging. Um, and then when the music became they just weren't compatible, really, living two different lives. So I jumped ship. And one of the teachers in the school that I've been teaching at said, "Oh, my son's trying to play the guitar, learning to play the guitar, but he can't find other people to play with. Is there anything you might be able to help with?" So me and another musician that I was playing with at the time, we set up a project that we called The Real Thing, that was just about putting bands together, essentially. So my introduction into community music was really through band work, and all that was what that was doing was just kind of creating the conditions, so in a local community centre, getting some kit together, getting some young people together, making bands, helping them to understand the process of being in a band, some of which is about the music, some of which is about dealing with different personalities, and all of that. And then my community music practice has really changed as my practice as a musician has changed. So I met the other singers in Mouthful, which is a vocal quartet I sing with, like, over probably nearly 20 years ago now. And I'd always sung harmonies. Um, but singing in a four piece was really really interesting for me as a musician. And then not long after that, I started leading choirs kind of locally here, and then most of my practice as a community musician now is voice work. But I also train musicians. I was the head of higher education and research at Sage Gateshead for nearly 10 years.
Wow.
And that involved running the degree programs, overseeing the 2 degree programs that we had, one of which was a degree in community music, one of which was the jazz degree. And that really made me realize that I didn't have the academic chops. I'd never had a really academic background previously. I kind of scraped through a degree earlier on. But I decided to put myself through study and kind of did a professional doctorate, which is about how you take the knowledge that you have and turn it into useful knowledge in an academic sense. And then since then, I've got a role now at the Royal College of Music, where I lecture in music education, and at Trinity Laban in London. And I still maintain a practice here that is very much about connecting people through music. So I think I've made a really useful connection. There's a great guy at Royal College of Music called David Wright, who writes about the history of the ABRSM. So it's kind of a world away from my background, but he makes the point that, like, in the 50, 60, 70 years ago, the role of the organist in a community would be not just to play the organ in the church, but to facilitate all of the other music making within that community. So I think, and I think there's I really like that as an idea, because I think it's a way of people from every kind of background understanding what a community musician might be. It's like it's the musician in the community that helps people in that community to be a community through the way that they make music with each other.
All together. Yeah. I, there's several points that interest me in kind of in your journey, in your path. And one is that thing about inadvertently coming onto community music and how it kind of found you, if you will, and yet you had this other training in teacher training, and you're a gigging musician, and it kind of leads on to my question around what does training mean to you? And I put the training in brackets in terms of community music, because you, like myself, came from music and practice and ended up doing some academia, but it didn't necessarily define who we were as practitioners. The academia came after, uh,
Yeah,
added to the pot, but it wasn't necessarily, it's not how community music found us.
yeah.
It. So I guess, yeah, what does training mean to you in the context of community music?
I mean, the thing I always go back to when I think about training, and I think about all the different kinds of training that I've been involved with. So, we ran a traineeship at Sage said, um, for, well, I don't know, 8 years or so, when the organisation was first starting, with the intention of building the workforce, because it was an aspiration to deliver a participatory programme at Sage said that was of equal value and equal financial value as the performance program. And obviously the big challenge was there aren't enough musicians who know how to do this work to be able to deliver the program we're aspiring to. So, but the model that we worked with then, and that I think is absolutely what it's about, is the idea of situated learning. So this kind of idea of communities of practice, that how people learn. The thing I always say to anybody that wants to become a musician, a community musician, is that there isn't a way of being a community musician. There's only your way of being it, because you're unique as a musician, and the people that you work with are unique individuals as well. So everybody's practice is different. In fact, one of the students, I write about this in an article, one of the students who was on the degree course that we ran, kind of made the reflection in one of his essays at the end of his studies. Like, he said, David, like, literally every practitioner that you've brought in to tell us about community music thinks that they invented community music. They're the people that invented it, and he's absolutely right. For community music to be authentic, it has to be something that is something that is particular to you in your situation. You can't be a community musician in the mold of somebody else, because you're not somebody else. So training for me isn't so much about learning a set of protocols or procedures or tools that you can implement. It's understanding who you are as a musician and how you use the skills and resources that you have as a musician to be musical with other people. It's a mindset, and it's about a set of values. I think that's the thing that we highlighted in the from the work that we did in the training on the community music degree course. Is actually, it's about a set of values, and those values can't be taught. Values are caught, not taught. So, you understand what I mean? So
Yeah.
you saying these are my values doesn't mean they're your values. You can say you have what your values are, but that doesn't mean that that's what people think of when they think of you as a practitioner. So your values, what people value about the way you work, might be different to the things you say are valuable about what you do. So, and I think some of those values are things like empathy, humility. I don't know if listening is a value, non-judgment, curiosity. I think all of those things are values. And I think of, as a musician, if that's what you're interested in, what motivates you is understanding, how can I use the skills that I have to help other people, or to work with other people, or support other people, or to facilitate other people's musicality. Then that's part of my purpose as a musician. So training for me is about unlocking something that's already inside. It's not about teaching skills. It's about understanding yourself better as a musician in order to apply what you know and what you do as a musician in ways that that bring about some kind of change, or that have the intention with them that they'll bring about some kind of change. It's not just, it's not a transactional thing that you're just doing it for the money. There has to be a value base to it.
It's interesting because you are working in conservatoire slash academic settings. Do you feel that you have been given rein or permission, for lack of a better word, to enable the students to develop those skills that are innate potentially, that what we're talking about here is being in a space with students, trying to, the meta of encouraging them to then be the types of practitioners who are true to their values? And
yeah, that's such a great question. It's like it opens up a whole, all of my research is all about all of this stuff. The thing that I use, that I constantly come back to help me to help people, I think, to kind of understand what it is that I'm talking about, is this idea of music in 3 dimensions that you'll find in all of my writing. That there's, that music has at least 2 dimensions. There are 2 musical dimensions to it. One of which is about the aesthetic, about how music sounds and how we manipulate sounds in particular ways to achieve particular effects for a listener. And the other is participatory. So Thomas Chirino and music as social life, that music is one of the ways in which people express themselves as a social group. It's one of the ways, it's the way that music binds people together, and it's a fun activity to do. So therefore the purpose of the music is to facilitate as many people as possible to participate in it. And those 2 things are historically in tension. So and I think that part of the challenge for conservatoire students is that because these 2 dimensions have been historically in opposition to each other, it's hard to come out of an aesthetic perfectionist mindset and to see something that doesn't resemble that as anything other than not quite as good as. And I don't think that helps anybody, actually. So the 3rd dimension is what I refer to as the paramusical, which is this idea that the things that go along with the music. So whether you're a community musician working in a village hall or a community centre or a school or wherever, or an orchestral musician, you imagine that whatever you do as a musician is having some kind of effect beyond the music. It's moving people in some way to feel something that goes along with the music. It's not just about the music. And I think that idea is something that speaks to every musician, whatever musician of any stripe. You can understand, actually, you want your music to do something for people at some level, whether that's from a participatory angle or from a listening to it angle. So the work that I see myself doing in the conservatoire is just simply about encouraging students that very much within this perfectionist mindset of the aesthetic model of music, just to open some of these other possibilities. It's not to set these things in opposition, but just to encounter different ways that people have been musical. And in that encounter, I think people realize, oh no, there's a whole load more to music that I don't necessarily inhabit on a daily basis. Some of the best stories I get are when people say, it's been, people have been working in a participatory setting, working with a community musician, and they go, oh my God, it's brilliant. It's like, it's reminded me how much fun music can be. It's reminded me of why I wanted to be a musician, because actually this is about having fun, and it's about the people in the room. Who are we and what are we going to do together? And being able to let go of that perfectionist mindset means that actually I can relax more. I've had some great stories of people saying it's been brilliant for my performing career, because now I can just think about, actually, who am I performing to? How do I want to connect with these people in the room? It's not just about the work that I'm performing, it's about me and these people in this space. So actually, if I want to communicate and express something to these people, how can I relax in a way that helps me to do that? And I think it's all of those dimensions need to be present in music. So I don't personally see a distinction between training in a conservatoire and training in a very informal way as a community musician. We're always, all of us, thinking about, or we should be thinking about all of these things. How do we make the music better? Because when the music is better, everybody's experience is better. How do we make it more accessible? How do we ensure that it achieves effects beyond the music itself that are transformational?
Yes. I mean, I think in some senses it comes down to supporting and enabling those who are, I don't want to say students because I don't want to kind of take away from non-formal academic settings, but this thing, like saying authenticity. What is your authentic practice?
Yeah.
And giving them tools to explore what that is, and a safe space, kind of reflecting a safe space in the classroom, if you will, or in the training room that says this is that place where you can be that. And if you play a wrong note, great, fine. And not putting the kind of the tension in the pressure of the aesthetic outweighing the experience somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it's in, well, no, I'm not going to sidetrack. There's so in terms of advantages or dangers of training community musicians, what
Well,
do you?
the big danger for me is that I can see, and I think we're already seeing it to an extent, is that because community music is now an academic pathway, you can study a degree in community music. Most students now, I think, at university studying music will have the option to do at least a module in community music or participatory music or socially engaged music practice. I would think it's kind of ubiquitous. There's an understanding now that if you're going to sustain a career in music, you will need to know something about how to work with groups, or at least how to teach. But because there's an academic route, it means, I think, that there's the risk of there being a split. Like most of the community musicians I know are community musicians because they have self-identified as not being academic. And I was the same until I was put in a position where I had to kind of develop some academic chops. The number of times I hear people saying, actually, if you think this is about trying to theorize the practice, you've missed the point. The point of community music, it's a little bit, don't try and pin it down, because if you try to pin it down, you've missed the point. So there's a lot of resistance within community music practice to theorizing the work, and I think that's something that we do need to get past. One of the things I kind of say is, actually, it's that diversity, that sense of uniqueness and difference in the practice that is a distinguishing characteristic of it. You don't have to be anybody else's community musician, but I think there is a risk that you can end up with a split, that there's a version of community music that emerges that starts from theory rather than that starts from practice. Do you understand what I mean?
I totally get it. I mean, in a discussion last night, the very thing somebody said, well, I'm highly educated in community music. And then I said, well, what does that mean? What is it in the broadest sense? What do we mean by being educated in community music? And, having a degree isn't necessarily educated. It's just theoretically, maybe you have some theoretical frameworks, but lived experience and, situational learning, as you said. And so I am afeared that we have the kind of educated, which have some sort of stamp from a university. That
Well, and if you think about it, because the academy goes upwards as well. So there are master's routes in community music. There are doctoral, there are doctors of community music. There are people with PhDs in community music. So there is a body of writing now, of academic writing, that is largely written by people within institutions. So that will become, or those books will become, the means by which people kind of aspire to be community musicians. Now, there wasn't any of that there 20 years ago. So people becoming community musicians had to work it out for themselves. You work out your own perspective on it. So the risk for me is that in having a version of community music that is written by some people. It doesn't matter who the people are. I'm one of those people. I write about community music, but having a version of community music that is written by some people means that you get a kind of Arsene Wenger calls it a reification. I know this is very academic, but a reification, it's a version of itself that isn't the same as what the actual practice is. And I think and I think that's the real risk, is that you can end up with this kind of a version of community music that's a bit dry and isn't really got the dirt of the reality of community music, which is messy and uncomfortable and awkward and full of all kinds of contradictions. So I think there's I'm
No,
rambling.
I love what you're saying, and I want to have like an hour recorded. But what I was going to say, that I think the big distinction now compared to when a lot of those books were written or articles is that most of the people that initially started studying community music in academic settings were practitioners first. And now what we have are students coming through school into university, undergrad, and up through postgrad
Yeah.
without having all the lived experience first.
Yeah, no, it will be possible. It will be possible to be a doctor of community music by the age of 25, never having really had a practice in community music, I would say.
Out with doing it with,
Not that I'm saying there are people that,
you know,
that is now, but I think the root is there.
yeah, and anyway, bigger discussion there. One last question, Dave, because I think you and I could talk for Scotland.
Sorry, Jess.
No, it's wonderful. It gets me thinking so much about sound sense and our voice and where we stand and what being educated in community music means.
Well, I mean, I think maybe just before you ask that final question, the point for me is about trying to understand, how do we actually take the real knowledge that exists in community music practice? How do we find ways of articulating that in the academy? And I'm thinking really, really broadly, and not, especially internationally. So how does indigenous musical knowledge make its way into the academy? How can it be expressed in ways that, it doesn't have to be squashed into an academic format? How can we make the knowledge that we know exists on the ground in practice into something that has value in the academy and is respected within the academy?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that ties a lot in with training the community musician. I sound like I'm pitching, but this is all part of this series of conversations, is around broadening access
Yeah.
to just what you described.
Yeah.
That
It's
this
not just
is
it's not just training people to develop the skills for practice, but it's training practitioners, not how to fit in an academic box, but training practitioners to be able to articulate their practice in ways that have value in an academic platform. And there's a good political reason for that as well, is because I think the academy is a little bit more resistant to funding changes. I think that, in education and in cultural policy, so many decisions about funding are made by governments of different stripes, and we find ourselves jumping to different policy frameworks. 15 years ago, it was all about social impact. Now it's all about health and well-being, and that's just because policy has shifted and practice has to jump to meet policy. What I noticed, and the reason I was kind of keen to develop my academic chops, is that actually the higher education has a way of resisting those policy changes, because the thing that determines what happens is peer review. It's knowledge, not politicians. So it's so that the academy is a bit more resistant to the political whims of changing governments, but because actually it can establish a base for, or a reason for funding that is actually grounded in evidence, and evidence that comes from practice.
which can serve the field. So I don't want it to seem as though we're beating up on the academy.
No. I think, not at all. Yeah, I think it's broadening the scope of the academy. I think that's what higher education is for. It's to be able to develop knowledge that is useful and can be put to service. A lot of the stuff that concerns me now is, how do we put music to service as a resource right now in this period of human history. How can music help us to face some of these, you know, complicated and terrifying challenges that we currently face as a species on a very fragile planet?
Oh, I couldn't agree more again. Um, so with that in mind, and I think it kind of ties in again with this last question around the fragility and this time, and we're always responding to what's happening as community musicians, whether it's in this time in history or any time. It's if all community musicians had to develop three attributes or skills, and you had to pin it down, of course you'll come up with umbrella terminologies, but what would they be?
I think they'd be, for me personally, I think they'd be values. I mean, yeah, so I think empathy would be right up there, because I think being really interested in the musical journeys of other people, and why people are music, you know, being really interested in why someone might want to be musical and what it might mean to them. I think that's really critical in terms of being a community musician. So empathy and being willing to you know, walk a mile in someone else's moccasins, you know. But I also think musicality. I think, you know, really challenging yourself as a musician to be sure that the way that you control sound, you manipulate sound, is a role model for everybody that you're working with as well, because I think that really enhances everyone's musical experience. So, you know, setting as high a bar as you can around the quality of sound that you can make with your voice or with your instruments or with your production, because that in turn will influence and inspire everybody that you work with. I would also say, I'm kind of I went down to a protest. I live in West Cumbria, and some people will have probably heard on the news. West Cumbria has decided that it might be a really good idea to put a coal mine here. You know, we're about to host COP26. There's the like reports coming out that say we may already be past the tipping point. You know, and there should absolutely be no more carbon removed from the earth. But in West Cumbria, there's a sense in which this might provide like resources for some jobs, and that's really important. But it's like, that's really not what we should be doing in 2021. So I kind of went, you know, we took a group of singers down to the protest to be part of that, and loads of people here are really for the mine, and I know that some of the accusations that people throw at, you know, at people that are protesting is that, you know, it's the woke brigade. And I was kind of thinking, actually, what's wrong with being awake? What's, you know, if a tidal wave is about to hit your house, or your boat is like heading for the rocks, it's really probably quite a good idea to be awake rather than asleep while disaster kind of, you know, happens around you. And one of the songs we sing is like, you know, we have to wake up. So I think being awake to the political reality that we live in, and wanting your music to be part of the solution to some of the problems that we face. So, you know, thinking beyond the idea of music as a recreation or as a coping strategy, you know, for the indignities that are inflicted upon us by living in the times that we live, but thinking of music as a way of changing some of those things. The book I'm working on at the minute is called Music Making in the Civic Imagination, and that's what I really, you know, I really think that at its best, what music making does is it provides people with a space where they can encounter each other in ways that are very different to the ways that we're required to live with each other in everyday life. So I think, and whatever that means for, you know, for you as a musician, that's, I think you have to understand everything that we do as humans needs to be focused on how do we make our life on the planet more sustainable. So being awake to the necessity for music to be part of the solution.
I I love that, and I think it ties so beautifully into empathy. So
Yeah,
it's I yeah, I'm with you there. Um, Gosh, thank you so much, Dave. I'd love to just talk longer, but I
I
think
know,
it's
me
not
too.
our conversation. And I hope we see you at one of our TTCM events because it'd be great.
Yeah,
Okay, the next one's at Bristol in February. But I'll come.
great. I should look forward to it.
Thank you so much for being
Great,
on
thanks, Jess.
the conversation. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.